Welcome to Module 5, the last in a 5-module series on low-tech process-based restoration of riverscapes. In this last module, we're going to focus on the final step, implementation. It's inclusive of construction, as well as prior to that, the consultation and permitting process, etc. Our instruction team is going to consist of myself, Joe Wheaton, Steve Bennett, Scott Cheverdian, Jeremy Maestas, and Nick Bowis. We've introduced everybody to you before in the previous modules. And we've also, back in the first module, just showed you the impressive distribution of where you guys all come from in terms of participants in the virtual live version of this workshop. Those of you watching this after the fact, you might also take some interest in of the roughly 1,000 folks that registered. One of the questions that we asked them, I'm going to focus over here first on what role best describes your aspirations, not necessarily what you're doing, but what you aspire to do with low-tech PBR. And over half, 569, said they wanted to be involved in planning, design, and implementation, the subject of this module. And then there's about 57 that said they wanted to be involved in implementation. So this is encouraging. There's a pretty big chunk of those that registered that want to be involved. This is also, I think, really neat. Most of you haven't done anything. So on the BDA side, right? So how many BDAs have you built? 772 have built none. How many PALs? 826 have built none. So there are 47 people that have built one BDA, 38 people that have built one BDA, right? And then, a bunch kind of up to this. Very few that have built these things at scale, more than 10. And to me, that's wonderful news because you guys are sponges to go out and try this stuff. That being said, this audience is a very experienced audience. And this is the part that's a little interesting to me. How many have been involved in any way in low-tech process-based restoration projects? And so could be some of the same people registering, but we're going to come to this in a second. Yesterday, Nick Weber asked folks to come and share what they're doing in LTPBR Explorer. And so if I just take this question, how many have been involved in any way in low-tech PBR projects? How many projects? It's interesting. 163 of you have been involved in one low-tech project. 305 and 2 to 5, so at least 610 projects, 5 to 10, 7 to 8. Now, it's possible that a bunch of you are friends and been involved in the same projects, but even the conservative estimate here of everybody that's been involved in something, at 2,000, I don't know, let's cut that in half. We call it 1,000 or 1,200 or something. We got 51 projects in here. We could get a lot more of you adding to this map. Thank you to those who have already added a few more dots. Appreciate that. It only takes like 3 to 5 minutes if you've got something. And just a shameless ploy to try to get you to keep adding projects so that we can get a feel for who's doing what where. The registration link is right here, and to incentivize that, Anabranch Solutions is going to send whoever shares that, yes, I registered. All you got to do is enter in your mailing address and your the link to show that you've registered something, and we'll send you some swag, whether it's koozies and stickers or whatever. So that's that. One thing I wanted to point out, I forgot to on this slide here. Not that. Oh dear, lost PowerPoint. That's neat. So one thing I wanted to point out when we go back one is, where did it go? Oh, there it is. So 51 projects, 3,600 structures, 100 and some odd kilometers, 111 kilometers. Okay, that's neat. That's good to see some effort, right? This is the thing I want to point out. How many kilometers of rivers and streams are there in the world? We actually don't know. We do know in the U.S. that we're dealing with 7.5 million miles, 12 million kilometers, right? That's a ton. And even if you take the low ballast of the estimates and the absolute worst of the worst, we're dealing with at least 15 to 20% of that in awful shape. Okay, so it's probably much worse than that when you consider things that have a lot of uplift potential. So we've got about 3.5 million miles of perennial streams. There's this paper that was recently published. How many more rivers and streams than we thought? Well, what they say is that people had estimated there to be a length of, where was it here? So there's about 2.1 million kilometers of streams that are greater than 30 meters wide globally. Well, what we do know is that greater than 30 meters, because this is what they can measure off a satellite, is probably less than 5 to 10%. So riverscapes are incredibly important, and we have so much work to do. This is just my way of saying why this implementation side of things is so important. Um, a few very effective planners and designers could be supporting an absolute army of implementers. And that is what today is about building that army of implementers. This is that worldwide estimate from just basically the big rivers, basically anything over 30 meters. And that's where this 2.1 million kilometers comes from. So today, we focus on that implementation of low-tech PBR to help improve the health of riverscapes that are facing structural starvation. We're past the point of you picking and choosing if you've made it here or come directly here. All the other modules have passed, and you can go back and watch any of those on your own leisure, at your own leisure, on the LTPBR website. All of the YouTube videos are posted of all of the lectures. And so you can fast forward through the boring bits, get to the bits that are relevant to you, and hopefully get and share the information that you need. Navigating the workshop pages is simple. Once you go from that home page, you can go right to the virtual workshop and take yourself right down to module materials, get on those module pages, and get the lecture slides, videos, and other resources. We've been using throughout the design manual, trying to keep you grounded on what are some follow-up references to the relatively brief introductions that we provide to all these topics. And today, chapter 6 is really what we're elaborating on. And when we're out in the field, which is really the best way to do the implementation workshop portion, but thanks to COVID, here we are doing something virtual. The pocket guide, it can be really helpful out in the field. Is just waterproof guide, it fits in your pocket, and it's just kind of the highlights, the Cliff Note versions of the manual and what we've covered in this workshop. So today's agenda. What we will do is, for this module, we will go through an overview of the implementation phase, which is the last of the phases in the conservation planning process. We'll elaborate on implementation, starting with the consultation and permitting process, then moving into some pretty fundamental stuff, logistics, equipment, materials, safety, and then post-pounding being one of the things that is frequently used in this business. Then Steve Bennett will walk us through the construction of various structure types, mainly PALs and BDAs. And then Nick Bowis is going to close us out by talking about adaptive management and how that relates to the implementation phase. We've been touching on adaptive management since Module 3, where we started in the conservation planning process focused on that core planning phase. And so we also touched on it in the design, and we're going to bring it home here in implementation and talk about how that adaptive management is used post-construction. And then finally, I will close the workshop out with a little bit of a synthesis of what we've covered, but more than anything, a call to arms, and to invite you to become part of part of the Army that is the generation that decides that we've had enough of unhealthy riverscapes, and that we want to try to nurse these things back to health and help them help themselves to be self-sustaining, healthy systems that can create not just more resilient ecosystems, but more resilient communities for ourselves as well. So that's today.